Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the SoundPEATS Life TWS. So I think the distinguishing characteristics of this guy, I think, are actually on the box. So those three things. So active noise cancellation. This one also has a pass-through mode. So it will cancel noise or boost it up a little bit for a transparent mode or pass-through mode as they call it. Has an environmental mic for clearer calls, so that doesn't really help their music, but during calls it will do noise cancellation as well. And the third piece is that 12mm dynamic driver, which is kind of hard to find. It's kind of a rare bird right there, a full 12mm dynamic driver in a TWS at $30. This one's on sale for $30 right now. So yeah, I think those are some pretty interesting features. What it looks like up close, kind of a black plastic case. And you get these sort of hang-down style shells, and it has a ovular nozzle right there. So that's sort of a interesting combination. This, I think, is the multifunction button, and if you touch this, I think it actually does volume as well. So I never really sorted out what does what, but I think that was how the touching worked. And this is also a hidden... not really hidden, but that's how you reset the pairing. If you hold that down, it will actually reset it in the case. So I love cases that do that. It makes it super easy to repair and pair with a different phone or device. So pretty nice. So we're kind of jump right into it. I'm not going to go over a ton of the TWS style features, how long the battery life is, how much everything weighs, how long charging lasts. This is a consumer level set. There's going to be a ton of reviews, all who go over that in gory detail. If you want to know what percentage the battery is at, minute 67, someone else will tell you that. But for me, we're kind of going to jump right into the sound. So reasons to buy, like I said, this 12mm dynamic driver, it actually sounds quite good. I would call it better than the price tag, better than that $30. It's kind of a rare thing, right, to find an IEM with a 12mm dynamic driver at $30. So to hear it in a TWS was surprising to me. Surprising that they actually did it. It's actually a quite nice driver, and it sounds as well as it does at the bass level that it does. It's it's kind of a surprising. I'm not sure which IEM would actually come closest to that 12mm dynamic driver. It's kind of a rare thing. So that's probably my number one reason why you would pick up this set is to have a 12mm dynamic driver in case you haven't had one in your IEM life. So it does have working active noise cancellation. I thought that was actually pretty good. It actually works. It's probably not up there with Sony or Samsung, but this is about 4 times less than Sony or Samsung. So I think they actually did a good job at ANC on this one. The pass-through, I think that I would call that a subtle boost. If you're used to hearing the pass-through mode, I think it actually does work. I'm used to Samsung style pass-through, which has almost a sliding scale of how much it boosts the environmental noise and passing it through to you. This one only has one setting, so I think they went for a lighter version of pass-through versus other sets, which maybe like my Samsung definitely passes through more noise, more environmental noise than this one does, but I can also turn it down to the lightest setting, which is probably really close to the pass-through there. So the price... right now, like I said, it's about $30 because there's a $10 off coupon on Amazon US, but I think normally it's about $39. And I think the whole package of 12mm, ANC, pass-through, and that price makes it sort of a very attractive package. It's kind of surprising me that they actually fit all that in at that price. It's I think they actually did a really good job on this specific package. And the third, the stage. It's kind of odd to get a TWS that has a pretty big sense of stage, a nice big stage around your head. And I would almost swear that this one does 3D processing or some kind of audio enhancement. Like some phones have the enhance button. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not sure that the driver and the tuning is really doing it as much as they're doing something in a DSP to make it sound a little bigger and a little wider. Could be wrong, could be 100% wrong on that, but it's actually a very interesting stage to listen to for that reason. So reason not to buy. So the tuning and the presets are definitely more fun, a lot more bass. This is a heavily bass set, more so than a natural set. If you're used to a very natural sound, with sort of a slight bass boost. That's not what this one is. This one is a pretty big bass boost, and we'll get into that in a minute. And it does have a unique tuning, and again, we'll get into that in a second. If that's not your preference, and the EQ controls are a little hard to fine-tune. I think the bottom end, you have a lot more control over the upper end, and we'll talk about that a little later. But so let's take a quick look at the tuning and what the frequency response kind of looks like here. So pretty crazy graph, and that's sort of, again, why I said the DSP is always on this one. I think a lot of this tuning is probably DSP controlled versus, you know, putting dampers and other things right on the driver. I think this one is heavily based on DSP tuning. And what they call the blue line here, they call it the SoundPEATS Classic. So you can't turn off EQ. SoundPEATS Classic, I think, is the default one. That is the one that's running when you pop it in. If you don't install the app on your phone, you're going to end up with SoundPEATS Classic. So SoundPEATS Classic has this really huge bass bump right there, and that's 12 millimeter dynamic driver, kind of shaking your ear. It is a very full bassy sound. You can't wave your hands over that and say it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like that much bass. And then they actually drop it off really sharp right here. And again, that's probably the DSP right there, because that's really hard to do in dynamic driver. So they, right before it hits the mids, you know, drop it off. So the mids stay pretty clear, and then you kind of bump everything up a little bit and have some, you know, sort of normal, almost IEM style peaks in the upper treble. But it's a very strange looking shape if you're used to IEM frequency responses. So as I mentioned, it actually does do EQ, and I actually prefer the EQ version of it. So Paul's EQ is sort of the grain. So I definitely dropped the bass a lot for indoor listening. I think dropping the bass actually worked better for me. I don't need that much bass in my ear. And sort of in a non-traditional move, I actually bumped the treble up. And I think this just balanced more even with this bass level, even though I dropped this a little bit. Bumping this, I think I actually do prefer that, just to have everything a little sharper, a little cleaner, a little more detail, a little more apparent resolution to balance with this heavy bass load here. So these are sort of the two styles that I were using. So the Classic is definitely a bassier, more fun version, and my version is just sort of a slightly cleaned up version that brings the mids a little more forward or not as behind the bass. So that is that. So sound wise, like I said, it's a very bassy, fun V shape, kind of showcasing that 12 millimeter dynamic driver sound. And as I mentioned, I think a lot of it is tuning by DSP. So this one tends to either use the built-in EQ presets. Like I said, there's a SoundPEATS Classic preset, or your custom, which is what I showed on my graph. And the custom EQ, I think it's actually done pretty well here. For convenience-wise, it remembers after you power it off and repair and all that thing. A lot of sets, some other ones that I've tried, tend to, you have to re-enable the EQ and then set the preset again. This one tended to remember it right away, or I tend to have the app open anyway, so that all worked out pretty good for me. But I do prefer the custom EQ, just to lower the bass and they clean up the mids. Like I said on the graph, I think that was just my preference. Certainly, if I was using it outdoors, mowing the lawn, I would probably just leave it on the SoundPEATS Classic, because I think the bigger V shape with the more bass definitely is going to work out a little better in a noisier environment. So the bass, like I said, it's a big driver, 12 millimeters. It's kind of hard hitting. It's got a tactile level of bass. There's just a lot of bass there. For outdoor use, I do think it's a nice level of bass, but indoors, it's like I said, I do EQ it down a little bit. It kind of hits you like a subwoofer. It's a lot of bass using that Classic EQ. For the price and the quantity of bass that they're giving you, I thought it was kind of impressive. A lot of sets at that price, typically older TWS would give you some really horrible bass at that level. This one tends to be probably, it's quite clean. Not the fastest bass, not the sharpest, tightest bass, but as far as a set that you could listen to with not complaining that the bass is super bloated and woolly and all the other things that happen when you throw a level that high, they actually did a really, really good job, especially at the price like I was talking about. So the mids, like I said, that hard DSP drop-off from the bass to the mids, it keeps it a little cleaner. There's still a ton of bass. You can't really get beyond that. if your track has a lot of bass, it's going to sound like a lot of bass no matter how far they drop that off right there. But I still prefer to drop the bass so the mids are just more prominent over the bass, and that's just, like I was talking about it. It's just a presentation style. I like to hear these a little more forwards, and in this case, it's not so much that the mids are more forward, it's that the bass has been dropped a little bit into a level, just more in line with where the mids are. So that's what I did. You're certainly welcome to use one of their presets, but that's what I did just to for my style of mids. And what comes through in the mids is surprisingly good detail and clarity over a lot of bass, which is actually hard to do at this price. Even on Dynamic Driver, it's really hard to have that much separation in the mids, so it actually sounds quite reasonable. Instruments aren't buried under lots and lots of bass. This one actually does a pretty good job. And again, I don't know if that's DSP or a good driver, how they really pulled that off. It does have a little, what I would call a DSP timbre to it, and a lot of it is this. I think it just sounds a little processed. I do think they are doing something to it, so it doesn't sound 100% natural. It's got a processing timbre to it, is what I will call it. So again, it's more of a fun style set than a natural set that you might think of as your IEM replacement. This one is definitely more of a going out on the go, mowing the lawn, outdoors, even taking calls or listening to podcasts. I think that actually works pretty good too. But as far as a very natural IEM replacement, this one is definitely more on the fun side. So the treble, I definitely bumped it up for a bit of fun, a more energetic sound for outdoor use. And it actually did lend a little more clarity to the mids just to cut through the bass. Like I said, it's basically said I think it just needed a little bump to kind of cut through there. So the upper treble, same thing. It was masked a little bit on bassier tracks. So bump it up a little bit, becomes a little more apparent, a little more prominent. Bring the bass down a little bit, kind of same idea. I think the upper treble was there. I think it was just a little harder to hear. So the part of the custom EQ that is lacking is really the treble part. They have a lot of controls over the bassier from mids down, but from mids up into treble, a more limited number of bands you could actually change. So it works, like you said. You do have some sort of fine control over. There's probably 3 or 4 sliders right here just to bump it up 1 or 2 dB, and I think that actually worked out pretty good. But if you want finer control, as in taking a specific 5K and bumping it up, you couldn't really do that in their application. So that's why I said that the EQ controls are a little harder to fine tune. At the coarser level, you can definitely do it, and I certainly did it. But definitely for people who are looking to fine tune peaks and valleys, that's going to be a little bit harder, and that probably would have been the part that I would change in the application going forward. But finding the balance between fun bass and treble and clarity is sort of what I was going for in sort of the controls that they give you. Stage-wise, the pinpoint imaging is just kind of average on this one. A lot of it is just the bass level. It just sort of clouds the stage as far as pinpoint accuracy, but I think generally the space feels big for a TWS. A TWS at this price, it sounds really big. So I do think it is one of those cases where the stage and how they did it definitely adds to the overall sound, and it definitely sounds more expensive than $30. So yeah, I think overall, pretty impressed with this one. I mean, it may not be everyone's dream TWS, may not be everyone's best TWS, but as far as wrapping up some crazy features, that driver, ANC, pass-through, that's a lot of value there for $30. So very, very likable set. So looking forward to what they do next on, they have something called Air 3 Deluxe, I think will be their next one here. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.